Hi everyone, welcome to Strengthening Incubators and Accelerators Across the Asia Pacific webinar today. I will now hand over the time to Will Scott Kemmis from Second Muse.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. This is one of a series of launch events that we are hosting for a couple of practical resources that were developed through the Frontier Incubators program, specifically for incubators and accelerators across the Asia Pacific region. Before we proceed, just a few housekeeping instructions. So we won't take any questions during the presentation, but fear not, the second half of the call is a Q&A, so please hold your questions for then, or use the console, the chat function in particular, to share your questions. If you choose the send to organisers and panel option, you can send those questions directly to us. And if you have further questions that weren't answered by the end of the webinar, please feel free to email membership@avpn.asia. So with that, my name is Will Scott Kemmis. I work at Second Muse, a development innovation specialist focused on transitions to future economies. We have offices across America and Asia and led the Frontier Incubators program for the Australian government, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Innovation Exchange. I'm joined on this call by Audrey Jean-Baptiste from YGAP, Lily Yu from Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and Matt Wallace from ONOW. All of these individuals and these organizations were critical partners in the Frontier Incubators program. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment. A huge thank you before we jump into things to AVPN for hosting us today and for also hosting us at the recent Bali Southeast Asia Summit. With that, over to the next slide, please. So a quick summary, quick takeaways from today's call before we jump in. So we're here to provide a bit of an insight into some practical and innovative tools that were created for intermediaries or incubators and accelerators to help them apply a gender lens and to improve their programs and their operations. We should also on this call provide a bit of an insight into how intermediaries can take action to support more diverse entrepreneurs and to identify what they need to develop more inclusive business models and even more inclusive ecosystems. And then lastly, a bit of an insight into trends, challenges and opportunities facing intermediaries, incubators and accelerators and entrepreneur support organizations across the Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. So in terms of flow for today's call, I'll provide a quick introduction of the Frontier Incubators program in which these resources were developed. And then I'll walk you through the first of those, which is the Guide to Impact Incubation and Acceleration. Then I'll hand over to Audrey, Lily and Matt for a deep dive into the Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit. We'll then finish with some questions. Next slide, please. So before we get started, just a couple of important notes. So today we will be talking about two resources that have quite similar acronyms, unfortunately. The first is the Guide to Impact Incubation and Acceleration. We tend to refer to this as the guide. And the other is the Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit, which we tend to refer to as the Toolkit. Secondly, we will talk interchangeably about incubators and accelerators, entrepreneur support organizations, and intermediaries. These are all similar entities. There's a lot of overlap. You can imagine them as a kind of Venn diagram, and they're all audiences for this work. There are some subtle differences which we can maybe get to in the questions. Next slide, please. So a bit of context on the Frontier Incubators program. So scaling frontier innovation is part of the Australian government's efforts to harness entrepreneurship and innovation for sustainable development. The SFI program, as it's known, was led by the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Innovation Exchange. SFI consisted of three programs, Frontier Innovators, Incubators and Brokers. These three programs sought to work across both demand and supply side issues to increase the generative capacity of local entrepreneurial ecosystems and to increase the flows of appropriate capital into and across the Asia Pacific region. Given that these were innovative programs, learning was one of the key objectives for all of these. Innovators and incubators have now closed. Frontier Brokers, which is focused on experimenting with new financial instruments and intermediary structures, is still continuing. And please see the SFI website, which we'll link at the end if you would like more information about that program. Next slide, please. So Frontier Incubators was a pioneering program. It was an incubator of incubators, or an accelerator of accelerators, if you will. We worked with 31 different organizations from around the Asia Pacific with the assistance of 11 incredible technical partners. The focus of the program was on both improving incubation and acceleration programs run by these organizations in order to increase the quality of support for entrepreneurs. It was also improving operations to increase the financial sustainability of these organizations and to increase staff retention. This program was delivered by Second Muse, Conveners.org and YGAP for the Australian government. Next slide, please. So why support incubators and accelerators? I think there's lots of arguments for this. ESOs, as we've come to calling them, or entrepreneur support organizations, play a critical role in entrepreneurial ecosystems. They increase awareness of entrepreneurial pathways for aspiring entrepreneurs, and then provide vital early stage support through the incubation or pre-incubation stages. They facilitate incredibly important engagement between different stakeholders, including local government, local investors, and entrepreneurs. And through these efforts, they play a key role in the growth of impact ventures. From our perspective and from that of the Australian government, by supporting incubators and accelerators, we can raise the quality and stability of support for entrepreneurs, and through this realise more investable ventures, capital flow and development impact if we're focusing on impact ventures or social entrepreneurs. By looking particularly at the issue of gender inclusivity and accessibility, we can also increase the responsiveness of these ventures and ultimately increase gender equality. By supporting incubators and accelerators, we were also aiming to strengthen their capacity to play strategic roles in entrepreneurial ecosystem building. I'll get to this more in just a second. Next slide, please. So the program design was really built on this early research, which indicated just how critical team is for incubators and accelerators. So at the center of an incubator and accelerator is the team. The team delivers the programs, the incubation acceleration programs, manages the development and delivery of curriculum within that. They hold the personal relationships with the investor network and other strategic partners, and they hold the personal relationships with the mentor network as well. In addition to that, they manage strategic initiatives, which is essentially the consulting function that helps to diversify revenue for incubators and accelerators. So with that, there was an acknowledgement at the beginning of this program that the team and supporting the team to grow is incredibly important. And if we zoom out to look at incubators and accelerators in ecosystems on the right-hand side of the slide, we were trying to illustrate here the different connections and different threads that incubators and accelerators have with a range of different stakeholders. They often facilitate the really important workshops and convenings that really provide the glue for an ecosystem to come together. Next slide, please. With that acknowledgement, we designed the Frontier Incubators program to look a little like this. So on the left-hand side, there was an acknowledgement that there are proven practices in incubation and acceleration around the world. So we selected a group of 11 technical partners to represent the breadth of sort of proven practice. And on the right-hand side, the cohort. Now we recognize there's a broader entrepreneurial ecosystem across the Asia Pacific, but we selected a cohort of 31 organizations that we believed were leaders in their respective ecosystems. And the program was designed to act as a kind of conduit so that we were sourcing proven practices, diagnosing needs of the cohort, matching them with appropriate technical partners, and then codifying the assistance that moved from left to right in order to develop a body of materials which could support the proliferation of proven practices in entrepreneurial ecosystems around the Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. Now, the result of this was a number of things. Obviously, we directly supported a group of 31 incubators and accelerators from around the region, but alongside that, we codified this body of material, which is the Guide to Impact Incubation and Acceleration. So this draws insights from close to 100 hours of training material and draws on the expertise and experience of 31 local organizations and 11 incredible technical partners. So this was a truly collaborative effort. You can jump to the next slide. This provides a snapshot of all of the organizations that were involved in the development of this material, the validation of the content. And like I said, it was a truly collaborative effort for all of these organizations. With that, next slide, please. So from here, we will jump into a walkthrough of the Guide to Impact Incubation and Acceleration. This is the first of the two resources that we will be looking at today. I think there'll just be a 30 seconds or so as we jump from these slides into that online interactive resource. So as I mentioned, there were two resources developed through the Frontier Incubators program, the guide and the toolkit. I'll give you a quick walkthrough of the guide to give you a bit of an indication of the material that's here, and we'll return to the Gligar Toolkit in just a moment. So this is a freely available interactive resource that you can access from the link that we'll provide at the end of the call. The material at this stage is only available in English with the exception of a simple language or translator plugin that we're using, but this is just a starting point in our efforts to make this material more accessible. This material was designed so that users could walk through the material step by step, beginning really with why incubation and acceleration, and what incubation and acceleration as practices what to use them for, and really what to expect in terms of results. The material here was designed to address some of the key practical areas or technical areas that someone seeking to set up or to manage an incubator or accelerator might encounter when setting up or managing these programs. And in addition, provide some case studies of organizations doing this work across the region. Now, the best way to navigate this material is, I would say, to jump to the content map, which you can access at the top. Next to this, you can also download an offline version of the material, so you can navigate all of this by PDF. But for the purposes of today's call, I'll jump straight to the content map. So this will provide a little bit of an overview of the breadth of the material that's here. So as I said, why incubation and acceleration in the first place? What makes these organizations important, and what role do they play in ecosystems? So with that, the intention here was to not only provide a practical resource for incubators and accelerators, but also to help improve an understanding of incubation and acceleration for the broader ecosystem. From here, we step into a series of sections related to working with people, So from building a team to selecting a cohort, then into designing an impactful program. Specifically, how does one design an effective and appropriate curriculum for your respective ecosystem, through to how do you engage investors and how do you close a program, acknowledging that incubation acceleration programs by definition are really time bound. Then we dive into some technical areas, looking specifically at helping ventures to measure their impact. Then stepping back out, measuring the impact of accelerators themselves. Many of these organizations are now seeking funding from foundations, development organizations and others, and helping them to measure their impact from our perspective is one of the critical ways to support these organizations to grow. And then, as I mentioned, we were looking also at operations. So there's a section dedicated to financial sustainability with an emphasis on diversification of revenue and strategies for diversification of revenue. And then for those more mature incubators and accelerators, we have sections on accelerating angels. So this is an approach to actually accelerating the growth of angel investment networks and angel investment in ecosystems. Managing mentor networks well. And then for those very mature and looking to expand either into new parts of their country or even new countries, there's a section dedicated to scaling and replicating programs. I'll jump into one of these sections now just to give you a bit of an insight into what kinds of content is in there and how it's organized. So each section begins with a simple, plain language explanation of the purpose of this particular body of material and what you can reasonably expect to be the outcomes of this section. What topics are covered, and importantly, what the next section here is. So as I mentioned, this was designed so that it can be walked through step by step, but the content map gives the ability for people to jump into a specific section here. For example, teaching a theory of change. So the previous section talks through the theory, the rationale behind a theory of change, and the purpose of this in clarifying an organization's impact strategy. But then goes on to provide very practical guidance around preparing for a theory of change workshop with a founding team. Following all of the step-by-step instructions, this section then goes on to provide a downloadable template for a theory of change workshop. So you can see with this that the material really does cover both the theory and the practical, or theoretical and practical aspects of incubation and acceleration. With that, I'll jump back to the content map. And so again, from the basic operations of working with people and designing a program through to financial sustainability and accelerating angels and even scaling and replicating programs, this material is intended to provide incubators and accelerators with a really comprehensive resource to help them with the operations of their programs. So with that, if we can jump back to the slides. And again, it'll just be a couple of seconds as we transition between platforms. Great, so next slide, please. Fantastic. So these two resources, the guide and the toolkit, are both freely available interactive resources for incubators and accelerators and others working with impact ventures. But the value is really contingent on their use. So there's really a clarion call for support to promote and share these resources. And we'll get to that at the end of the call. But I wanted to just briefly touch on some of the insights and options related to supporting incubators and accelerators in this region. So alongside the promotion of these resources, we are exploring ways that we can support these organizations more, with the belief that they play a really critical role in entrepreneurial ecosystems and the development of both investable ventures and impact. The insights and options that we're looking at for future activities are really build on what we learned through the Frontier Incubators program, and they are these three: delivering targeted support to develop sustainable models suited to team and ecosystem. So ecosystems across the Asia-Pacific region are radically different in terms of the policies and regulations that are affecting their development, the flows of capital in and out. And with that, there are appropriate incubation acceleration practices and organisational forms for specific ecosystems. But that really needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, or at least a country-by-country basis. Secondly, as I was saying before, the team is really central to the function of an incubator or accelerator in terms of their ability to manage investors and mentors, but specifically also the strategic initiatives or consulting that they're capable of doing to help diversify their revenue. And it is our belief, having run a cohort-based program, that additional really targeted support with these organizations is necessary if we're going to help them deliver that transition to really sustainable operating models. Now, with that, incubators and accelerators, even in mature markets across Asia across Europe and America, are still reliant largely on grant funding. And I think one of the unfortunate pressures has been placed on incubators and accelerators in this region to become financially sustainable. So we're instead advocating a diversification of revenue as opposed to a for-profit financial sustainability. With that, we're also looking to deliver targeted support around sector-specific programming. There's a significant growth in terms of mature incubators and accelerators in sector-specific programming, so running agricultural verticals, financial inclusion, or fintech verticals, and others. So one of the key observations here is what assistance is required to support incubators and accelerators who are generally sector agnostic to deliver really high quality sector-specific programs. And then next to that, as incubators and accelerators grow and given their position working with early stage ventures, what are the options for them to work either with or as financial intermediaries? There's a lot of potential here, and we see with the more mature incubators and accelerators, they're already naturally growing into this role. But what targeted assistance could be provided to support more of them to do this? Secondly, working on joint projects to address common challenges. We are seeing many of the same challenges, whether you're an incubator operating in Myanmar or Samoa. And we believe that there's great value in joint projects to address some of these. For example, what coordinated effort could there be to identify and catalyze more appropriate sources of capital? I think there's a much needed conversation happening now about the importance of the spectrum of capital, as ABPN describes it, and moving beyond really extractive models of equity investment. And incubators and accelerators working as intermediaries can play a critical role in advocating for ventures and advocating for impact. And then next to that, incubators and accelerators, as they play really critical connective roles as really facilitators in ecosystems, there's great opportunity there to support them to build more inclusive ecosystems across the region. And with that, is really, I think, a great segue into the Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit that was developed during this program. So with that, over to you, Audrey.
Hello, I think this is Lily's turn to jump in. Lily, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. So my name is Lily Yu, and I'm a senior advisor at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, also known as SPF. Can we move to the next slide, if possible? And the next slide after that, please. Great. So SPF, or Sasakawa Peace Foundation, is a private foundation based in Tokyo, Japan. We focus on funding and implementing programs on a range of different social themes, including peace building, ocean governance, international relations, and women's empowerment. So I work in the Gender Investment and Innovation Department, and our team leads the Asia Women Impact Fund, a $100 million initiative to promote gender lens investing and better outcomes for women-led businesses and businesses improving the lives of women in Asia. So our work also focuses on supporting development of a gender-smart entrepreneurial ecosystem in Asia, which essentially involves supporting entrepreneurs, businesses, incubators and accelerators, as well as angel investors to close gender gaps in entrepreneurship and investing. So for today's discussion on the Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit, or the Gligar Toolkit, I will talk a little bit about the what and why for why intermediaries should consider applying a gender lens. And then Audrey and Matt, our Gligar design and implementing partners, will take you through in a bit more detail on the tool itself. So going back to the objectives, we know from various reports, as well as our own research, that gender gaps in entrepreneurship are pervasive and they exist globally, with much of the evidence showing women entrepreneurs often experiencing greater challenges to scale their business. For example, a recent study by Village Capital and ISC showed that acceleration seems to widen the gap in equity fundraising, with male-led startups increasing the amount of equity they raise post-accelerator by over 2.5 times as much as startups with a female founder. This study indicates that investor unconscious bias and the higher perceived risk, please note that this does not mean the real risk of women-led startups, are potential reasons for this gap. So to address these gender gaps in entrepreneurship more efficiently, we wanted to support incubators and accelerators to apply a gender lens to their work. And throughout the research and development phase of the project, we tried to understand the needs of incubators and accelerators, as well as the challenges they faced in applying a gender lens. We wanted to take a user-centered design approach, working closely with intermediaries to develop a practical resource, which is now the Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit, that would work well for busy practitioners in the real world. And Matt will share his experience shortly. And we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to partner with DFAT's Frontier Incubators initiative over the past year, which has brought together their extensive network of incubators and accelerators from Asia Pacific, as well as their experts, and some of which became Gligar pilot partners, and combined that with SPF's focus on identifying effective approaches to support practitioners to adopt and apply a gender lens. Next slide, please. So what is a gender lens, and what does that mean for incubators and accelerators? So at a high level, it means trying to understand how your work is impacting people of different genders, and by taking a more conscious and holistic approach to considering gender in your work. You may identify, using this process, you may identify specific gender gaps in your work. And on a more practical level, we are advocating for testing, for piloting and experimenting with a range of different gender strategies and good practices, many of which are introduced in the Gligar Toolkit to help your team, the cohorts you work with, and the stakeholders in your ecosystem, including investors and policymakers, to consider how different genders experience and can gain value from your work. Ultimately, the goal of the Gligar project was to support intermediaries to identify what gender means to them and how they can adapt their practices to ensure that their work benefits all stakeholders. Next slide, please. So why adopt a gender lens? Why is gender important? Again, through the work of many organizations as well as our own, there is mounting evidence and information to indicate that adopting a gender lens makes good business as well as moral sense when it comes to creating more sustainable entrepreneurial and investment ecosystem. Our ultimate goal is to create more and better opportunities for entrepreneurs of all genders to reach their full potential, and incubators and accelerators are a key part of that equation. And we hope by applying a gender lens and using the toolkit, we hope you will, one, create a more inclusive culture that attracts and retains gender diverse talent into your organization and allows you to benefit from different ideas and viewpoints. Two, attract a more gender diverse cohort of entrepreneurs and create a more diversified investment pipeline for your investors. Three, improve your program curriculum to be more effective for all genders with support that truly speaks to their different needs. And four, influence the inclusive development of your ecosystem to benefit everyone. So next, I'd like to hand over to Audrey from YGAP, one of the Gligar design and implementing partners, to take you through a deeper dive of the Gligar Toolkit.
Amazing. Thank you, Lily. Thanks for sharing the really interesting and critical research, as well as all the action that SPF is leading on in the gender space. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar. My name is Audrey, and I'm from an organization called YGAP. We're an international development nonprofit with operations across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. We're an intermediary ourselves and run both mixed gender as well as female-focused accelerator programs. And we also do work to strengthen the ecosystems in the regions that we work in. And this has included the Frontier Incubators program, in which we've led the design and development of the Gligar Toolkit in partnership with Lily and her team. So without further ado, if we could switch to the next slide, I'd like to introduce the Gligar Toolkit. It's a first of its kind interactive resource that really aims to guide incubators and accelerators through the journey of uncovering how our activities are experienced by, but also impact different gender groups. So for example, this can be in our organizations, if we reflect on what is the current composition of our incubators management team, whether all genders are represented in those that are making decisions, whether our culture is being inclusive of all genders within our organization, or even if we think of our programs. So if we think of the life cycle of our program, from recruiting entrepreneurs all the way to managing alumni, how accessible and inclusive is the design, delivery, management of all of our work, all of our products and services and programs. So the Gligar Toolkit is very practical. It really aims to equip accelerators and incubators with the mindset, the strategies and frameworks to be able to consider gender within our work and to be able to consider it in a deliberate way. And in doing so, we can actually adapt as well as improve all facets of our work and ensure that we can increase accessibility and inclusivity for all genders. And as Lily mentioned, achieving gender equality, diversity and inclusivity is important for us as accelerators and incubators, not only because gender equality is a fundamental human right, but also because it can really help us achieve sustainable development and improve our business outcomes. And if you think of the role and the power that we hold as an intermediary, working directly with the founders, with the entrepreneurs who are having the impact, and with the rest of the ecosystem that holds a lot of power, whether we're talking about government creating policies or investors deciding where the funding goes, we can really play a role in the middle to try to challenge those power dynamics and ensure that everyone has access to the support that they need to create the impact that they want to see in the world. So the Gligar Toolkit was extensively piloted by incubators and accelerator partners over the past year. And this was really aiming to refine, validate, and contextualize the content for a Southeast Asian audience. The real case studies from those pilot partners are included in the toolkit, which I will walk you through now. So if we can switch to the demo, please. Whilst we're switching, it's going to, oh, that was faster than I expected. But whilst we're switching, we're very lucky to have one of our pilot partners, Matt from Opportunities Now in Myanmar, on the call with us, and he's going to share his experience with us after we do a walkthrough of the platform. So this is the platform. Again, Will took you through the guide to impact incubation and acceleration on the left, and the Gligar Toolkit is this one on the right, and it's a sister resource. So you're going to recognize that the design looks quite similar. How it starts is with 3 key introduction pages, which provide really good context if it's the first time that you're using it, but if it's not, you have the option right here to skip these pages. It offers an introduction video, and again, in very plain text, repeats what Lily and I just mentioned around the role that incubators and accelerators can play in making our work more accessible and inclusive of all genders, as well as the ecosystem. And then just further down the page, it walks through the 3 key categories that we explore through this toolkit. So again, it looks at, as incubators and accelerators, what we can do within our organizations to be deliberate about considering making our work more accessible and inclusive of all genders, reflecting on our program, how can we design our incubator and accelerator programs as well as deliver them so that they benefit and generate value from people of all genders, and then how can we leverage our position of power working directly with the broader ecosystem to influence them to consider gender within their work as well. I will navigate through the first 3 pages because I think they provide good context, but you can again either skip them, or as Will showed earlier, you can go to the content map, which will present itself at the top. The second page of the introduction is looking at gender and sustainability. So again, gender equality is a fundamental human right, and there's a case for it. But as intermediaries, we know that we're often operating very lean and are very time poor. So to be deliberate about considering gender and testing strategies, it's often helpful to understand how applying a gender lens is actually going to have an impact on our organization, program, and ecosystem from a business perspective, as well as in helping us to achieve our impact outcomes. And this section just highlights some of the key research around how applying a gender lens to your organization can help, whether it is by helping you to make better decisions, better understand your customers, perform better financially. It has all of the sources as well, and looks at how applying a gender lens to your program and influencing your broader ecosystem can also help you achieve your goals. And then the third and final page of the introduction is how to use this toolkit. So again, it's got a helpful video, and then we're going to skip through and look at the 3 recommendations for navigation of this toolkit. So if you don't really know how to start or how, considering gender can help you, you can actually start with this useful self-diagnosis tool. It's a really easy downloadable tool which will help you identify specific opportunities to make your work more accessible and inclusive of all gender. It's really a spreadsheet that allows you to navigate through some questions on your organization, program, and ecosystem to try to understand where you could be improving your practices. The second option is to jump to the content map. Again, this is something that's always available at the top, like in the guide, and we'll walk through this in a second. And the third option is you can download the whole toolkit and take it offline. So just continuing further, we've got some key considerations in how we developed this resource and what it does and does not cover. So if you continue in this way through the footer, you will actually go straight into the toolkit, and it starts with organization. But again, there's more than one way to use this toolkit depending on where you're at and what you need to use it for. So one way is you can actually navigate through these 3 little bars and have a look at the whole menu and explore it in that way. And the other way is actually to go to the content map. Very similar to the guide, this is what the content map looks like, and it gives you an overview of all of the different sections and subsections, so you can really navigate through to the section that appeals the most to you. So we've had pilot partners actually divide and conquer this with different teams within their organizations. We've had some download the whole toolkit and read it from cover to cover. So it really depends on what your preference is. Similar to the guide, you can navigate organization and go to subsections. Because of time, I'm going to jump straight into a subsection to show you what it looks like, because the rest looks very similar to the guide. So if we're thinking, for example, recruitment of entrepreneurs, if you're about to recruit your entrepreneurs and want to explore marketing and advertising. So for example, if you're not getting enough women-led ventures applying to your program, you could have a look at what key problems could be related to gender within your program, as well as work through some of the reflection questions. And then we've got some suggested strategies around what you could test within your context to solve for those issues that you've identified. Again, we know that it will really depend on your context. So what you have at the end of the page are downloadable exercises, which help you to put together a project plan that includes you really going through figuring out what are the specific issues and root causes of those issues within your organization, and then takes you to testing different strategies to determine the one that's the best fit within your context. Outside of that, we've got also the language translation, we've got the glossary, and keywords like down here, gender of our glossary will actually, when you hover over them, will be highlighted so you can get those definitions throughout. And then the other bits that I want to show you are just, you've got some instructions if you did want to share this toolkit any further. And then we've got the case studies. So again, the case studies are spread out throughout the toolkit based on the sections that they are most relevant to, but we've also got a section with all of the case studies from our pilot partners that went on the journey of developing this toolkit with us. And this is where we are now going to transition out of this demo. So we're going to have Matt from ONOW take us through his experience in using the toolkit. So if we can please switch back to the slide deck. Amazing. Thank you. If we can just go to the next slide. Great. So these are the 6 partners that came on the journey with us to co-designing this toolkit over the past year. We had intermediaries from Myanmar, Philippines, Indonesia, and Cambodia. And now I'm going to hand it over to Matt from Opportunities Now, which is an incubator for domestic migrant women in Myanmar. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks a lot, Audrey. My name is Matt. If we go ahead and jump to the next slide, I'm the managing director of ONOW Myanmar, or Opportunities Now, as we like to call it. ONOW is an incubator based in Yangon, Myanmar, that is specifically working with domestic migrant women. We're designed to build basic skills and financial capabilities and digital literacy, and then through a cohort model, move our entrepreneurs from ideation to market research and then into business modeling. We were not historically a gender-focused incubator, and we reached a point at which we realized it was quite important for us to take gender into consideration. We found that if you don't have a gender lens, then really you're designing for middle-class men. So it became pretty important for us to begin to take a gender lens perspective. And it's been a real pleasure to work alongside all of these program partners to implement this, because we are not gender experts. And that's really the great part about this toolkit, is it's built for people who aren't necessarily experts in the field and are able to still apply these ideas, these concepts to the organization. And so just to kind of take a couple of minutes to think about how we used the toolkit and continue to use the toolkit and what we have going forward. We've worked in each of these 3 different areas: our organization or our team, considering a gender lens, and our program, which was the most obvious to us, and then also in how we can affect the ecosystem more broadly using the toolkit. And when we saw the opportunity to think about our team and the way that we're structured, it occurred to us that there are a number of pieces we hadn't considered. For instance, how is power distributed through our organization? How are there compensation gaps? How is decision-making, the decision-making process followed? What power imbalances are there? And then especially in hiring, in the hiring process. So one of the experiments that we ran was to actually to consider how we post our jobs. What does our job description say? What does it imply about who could be a mentor or a coach to the entrepreneurs who are coming through our incubator? So we considered all of the ways that we described the job, and then we considered especially how we posted the job and how it was available. So you can read this case study on this really helpful site under the case study sections. But essentially, we found that if we post onto social media that a job is available, the image even that we choose to use can affect the people that apply for the role. We may have more men applying for the role if we use male coaches in the image about the available job in coaching or in training. So it was really a useful way to consider how we hire. In the program, when do we run the program? When is it available? The cohort sessions, should they be available on the weekends? Because many of the people we're working with, especially when they were women, were working throughout the week in a factory. And so if we're having our programs during the week, then these women wouldn't be able to attend. And so the toolkit helps us really consider all the way down to the detail of when we would run the cohort meetings. And then on the ecosystem level, it's made us want to consider our role as thought leaders in this area. We should write more about gender as an issue. We should, every event we go to, we should add the perspective of gender to the conversation, because at this point, because of this toolkit, we're able to add that value to an event that may not necessarily be about gender, but should consider the gender role. And then even taking another step towards developing a product that actually supports our sustainability as an incubator as we try to add this lens to other organizations. So I think what I really appreciate about this toolkit is that it follows a scientific method approach. It considers data, it's data driven. There are experiments, and you're meant to watch how things happen in the real world and compare them to a control case. It gives you those tools to follow that approach, but it doesn't sacrifice mindset in that process. So it considers the more qualitative value of having a gender lens in the way that you run your organization or lead your program or even influence the ecosystem. So I think the word I would use for it is deliberate. It's a deliberate tool that helps you build culture through a very tangible process. And before this toolkit, we really weren't taking a deliberate approach. It's helped us set goals in these different areas. And now as we develop our strategic initiatives, we're even looking at widening the team out so that we can have a more consistent gender lens approach through different parts of our organization and into the ecosystem. So as we do try to add it to the pieces that existed in our organization prior to the toolkit, we're also adding it to every new piece that comes through a more deliberate process. And quarter by quarter over the next year, we will do more assessment of our current HR processes. All of our hiring processes will go through a gender lens kind of approach. And essentially the lead that we've chosen inside our organization acts as a resource to all of our projects. So that's the kind of really tangible approach I would recommend to any other organization. Choose one person to be the lead who can bring this point of view to every conversation in the office or inside the organization. So thanks very much for this process, for getting to be a part of it, but also that it's a really tangible tool that we can use to improve our organization and the impact that we have inside of Myanmar. It's been a lot of fun. It's been very insightful. We're looking forward to the change that it's going to bring inside and outside our organization in 2020 and 2021 and far into the future. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks, Matt. That was really valuable to have your experience shared on this call as well. I think we're just going to move to Q&A now.
Hi everyone, this is AVPN. While we allow our attendees to think of some questions, they can type into our chat or the questions box. I can get started with a couple that I have here. One would be directed towards Matt as a follow-up to his presentation just now. How has the Gligar Toolkit helped you to consider sustainability, and how has it helped with any discussions or engagements with funders, or helped you think about different business models?
Well, so the most obvious one to me is this idea that incubators and accelerators really need diversified income streams to be sustainable, to continue to exist and affect change over time. And so just as an organization that has implemented the toolkit, we're able to bring that perspective to potential clients, to organizations, in more of a consulting kind of mindset or consulting kind of perspective. In conversations with donors, it becomes really essential as we consider a few of the SDGs that we emphasize this piece. We now have tangible metrics that we can actually point to as a result of using this toolkit. And so it really strengthens the argument or the case that we make when we're looking for outside support for what we're doing. And the third piece is just that this is a really obvious market. Prior we really weren't fully reaching this full market of women looking to launch businesses. And so by taking this perspective, by applying this gender lens, we're more effectively reaching our target customer, and that means our target customers are more satisfied. They are referring other clients to our incubator, and that over time means we're more sustainable and more likely to succeed as a company, just at its core. So I think that's my primary answer to it. Is it means we know our target customer far more deeply.
Great, thanks, Matt. I have another question here that can be directed at Audrey, Will, and Lily. How do you think the toolkits will influence the development of incubation and acceleration in Asia in the coming years? So feel free to go ahead, whoever has the first thought.
Sure, so maybe I can start. So for us, SPF, the Gligar Toolkit is really just the first step, and as one of the first resources for practitioners to consider how to apply a gender lens. As you go through the toolkit, some of the content, such as the glossary, is much more educational and helps intermediaries to, speak a common language around gender with each other. But moreover, we feel the Gligar Toolkit really aims to stimulate that experimentation, more conscious thinking, as Matt mentioned, influencing people's mindsets, applying a more deliberate approach towards action to close gender gaps. And another aspect that I really liked about the program so far is that we're starting to see development of a kind of community of practice, which is being led by the Frontier Incubators partners and the Gligar pilot partners. And what we saw during the pilot is that all of the incubators and accelerators really learned a great deal from each other. And it's very encouraging to see if we can continue to see that growth of that Gligar community of practice in the coming years, and to promote more peer learning going forward. So that's just my views.
That's great. Thanks, Lily. And I would double down on that. I think these materials are really just there as a reference point from our perspective. There's some fantastic content in here, but at the end of the day, the communities of practice and the peer support is critical, and we see these assets as really facilitating or prompting, initiating, if you will, conversations between incubators and accelerators about appropriate practices for the Asia Pacific region, as opposed to just importing practices from elsewhere. So, I mean, that's the ambition, is that alongside these resources, we're also nurturing communities of practice around everything from financial sustainability to managing mentor as well. And the outcome of that, if all goes well, is more quality incubation acceleration programs, more appropriate incubation and acceleration programs, more stable organizations and teams providing a more effective support year on year. And at the end of the day, coming from that, more investable, but also more impactful ventures. I think if we, one of the aspects of this is not looking at capital raised as the sole indicator of success for these organizations. Yeah, that's what we hope can come from these.
I think Lily and Will have covered a lot of the points, as well as Matt talking about helping intermediaries be more sustainable, by improving their operations. The only thing I'd add, being an intermediary ourselves at YGAT, we exist to support the impact entrepreneurs and to help them create the impact that they're best placed to create in the world. And we always think about, wouldn't it be great if we weren't needed anymore? And I think there's a role that we could play as intermediaries to, apply a gender lens to our work, our organizations, our programs and services, as well as how we influence the broader ecosystem. And in how we do that, can we help our entrepreneurs and the ventures that we incubate and accelerate to apply a gender lens to their work and consider how they can grow from this kind of early stage ventures, but be deliberate about considering gender within their work and in how they're creating their solutions to the problems that they're solving, so that we can all together drive towards achieving that gender equality.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I believe, Will, you have a couple of wrap-up comments.
Perfect, thank you so much. So as I mentioned earlier, and as Audrey and Lily also noted, these toolkits or resources are available now. This is the web address. These were launched at the recent AVPN Southeast Asia Summit in Bali. So please, if you can help us to promote, to share these resources, that would be greatly appreciated. If you skip through to the next slide. So we would also love your input. I think there's an ongoing conversation for us with the Australian government and other partners about how we can further develop these resources and how we can further support incubators and accelerators, intermediaries and entrepreneur support organizations across the Asia Pacific. So if you have any feedback on the toolkits or any responses to these questions or any further questions, you can reach out to us via AVPN or via the hello@frontierincubators.org address. If we can jump through to the next slide. And then just in terms of ways to engage, so there are some next steps with regard to GLIA. Audrey, would you like to talk briefly through these?
Sure. So in terms of the next steps for GLIA, we'll be looking at developing some modules focused on supporting women's entrepreneurship. We're also going to look at how we can consider gender within impact measurement frameworks. So how can we actually develop some gender measures that can help us to track outputs and outcomes when it comes to implementing gender strategies. And we're also going to look at doing further capacity building and training workshops for intermediaries. As Will mentioned, we also love your help in promoting and sharing both of these resources. And again, you can access them through the link that was on the earlier slide, but you can also download the toolkit and the comes kit associated with it in following this link. And again, if you're interested in reaching out to us and would like to explore partnerships opportunities or would like support in applying any of these resources, please don't hesitate to email us at hello@frontiersincubators.org. I think that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you AVPN for hosting.
Thank you, everyone. This is AVPN. Just want to wrap up quickly. Thanks for everyone and your participation and all of our speakers today. Just a quick reminder that we'll be hosting our annual conference this June 9th to 12th in Singapore. We're developing a lot of really interesting sessions, so I encourage you to please register online at conference.avpn.asia if you haven't done so already. And with that, I wish you a wonderful evening.